In a federal courthouse, a Latino man walks calmly through the main doors, ready to start his workday, but the security team does not recognize him and not only question him, humiliate him, detain him, take him to a back room, and there shave his head, laughing with each pass of the machine, stripping away more of his dignity. What they don't know is that this man has more power than they could imagine, and his silence is not surrender, it's the calm before the storm. It started like any other morning in San Diego. California cold breeze stirred the leaves of the eucalyptus trees lining the courthouse square as the sun rose, casting long amber shadows over the steps of the federal building in San Diego. The city had not yet fully awakened. Only the murmurs of distant traffic and the sharp rhythm of shoes hitting stone. Judge Emilio Reyes stepped out of his silver Toyota, adjusting the collar of his deep navy blue coat, his breath coming out in soft puffs. In the cold air, he held a thin leather briefcase in one hand. His walk was firm, unhurried, and deliberate. His black hair, with strand silver at the temples, was neatly styled, framing his face with quiet pride and showing just enough to reveal his serene expression. His jaw was firm and his back straight. She didn't wear her robe outside the courtroom. She had never done that. It was his choice. He believed in entering buildings first as a citizen, not wrapped in power, but rooted in presence. He approached the main security checkpoint as he had done hundreds of times before. The metal detector buzzed down at the bottom. A young woman scanned an ID card in silence. A man in a blue uniform adjusted his belt, checking a license plate, but then there was Officer Wilson Morris, 4 and so many years. Stocky, weathered face, the kind of man who seemed to have been doing this job since a boy. He was born in the middle of the interns, and he had that cold look in his eyes, evaluating him as if he were a problem, not a person. The moment Emilio took a step forward, Morris moved. "Sir," he said, his voice already annoyed, "I need you to step out of the line." Emilio paused for a second, examining his face. "Is there any official problem?" He didn't answer at first. He looked him up and down. Black hair with silver highlights, dark skin, elegant pants, the expression that didn't change. Something above, unsettled Maurice. Maybe it was his calmness. Maybe it was that he seemed to belong to his world, that had to be corrected without visible identification. He murmured, "Do you think you can just walk in here dressed like some fancy lawyer or something? That's not how it works, buddy." Emilio didn't react. He reached into his coat, slowly took out his federal judicial badge, and held it up. The badge caught the light, boot hand in his coat. He slowly took out his federal judicial badge and held it up. The badge caught the light, but Morris didn't even look at it. He snatched it from his hand and slid it into his pocket. Without asking, Emilio's tone didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "I would like him to give it back to me." Morris stepped closer, his breath carrying the aroma of stale coffee and sugar. His voice was lower now, but malice clung to every word. The younger guard next to the X-ray tape, he moved uncomfortably. He had noticed the tension, but, like many, remained silent. Emilio remained composed. "I need to get to a courtroom." Maurice interrupted him with a snort. Then, "You will follow my procedure." His words sounded like a whip crack. "Random inspections." "Let's go." Before I could respond, Morris grabbed his arm, not hard enough to leave bruises, but firm enough to show that could, if he wanted to. He led him away from the line, down a silent corridor beyond, the echo of foot traffic in the courthouse. The door through which they entered closed behind them with a thud. The room was small, without windows, with a metal chair in the center, a stainless steel cart with scanning tools beside it, and in the corner, a couple of hair clippers. Electric. Emilio's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. "Do not give my consent for this. You have no reason to stop me. This is illegal." Morris was near the door. "With your arms crossed, you're acting suspiciously," he said, not even pretending to justify it. Emilio didn't sit down, didn't move. Morris approached again. "Do you think showing a small badge means anything?" "A small badge means anything here. Not with me." 2 more officers entered. One was a tall man with a shaved head and nervous eyes. The other was younger, holding the back of the hair. Emilio slightly raised his voice. "This is a violation. I want all your names right now." "Names right now?" No one responded. Maurice took the cutters and turned on these, which, the low hum filled the room like a warning. "What are you doing?" Emilio demanded, stepping back. "Standard protocol." Morris scoffed. "Could you be hiding something in that little hair of yours?" Emilio tried to move, but the officer behind him pushed him towards the chair. He didn't scream, he didn't fight. He clenched his fists and sat with his chest rising and falling slowly as the clippers touched his scalp. A thick strand fell to the ground, then another, and another more. He looked ahead while pieces of himself, his history, his dignity, his identity, fell in silence. His breath hitched once, his eyes burned, but he didn't let them be noticed. One of the officers murmured, laughing, "You look better. You should have come in like this here, without that attitude." Maurice smiled, brushing off loose hairs. "From his uniform now, you look like someone who knows their place." Emilio didn't move, but his words came out sharp and clear. "You will regret this, Morris." Leoned leaned towards him. Bet, people like you always say that, and then leave, like ... Double quotes, good. Boys, this is how it works. He opened the door, and lazily nodded towards the hallway. The courtrooms are over there, sir. I didn't arrive late. Emilio stood up slowly and firmly, retrieved his badge from Maurice's desk without ask. She slid it into her briefcase and left. Her shoes clicked again, but this time each step felt heavier, not with shame, but with fury-controlled fury channeled. The kind that doesn't explode but accumulate. She didn't look back, because in less than 10 minutes, the man who had cut his hair would be standing in the back of a courtroom, watching him take the stand, and when he realized who he was, it wouldn't be with a bang, it would be with silence, and it would be more stronger than anything he had ever heard before. The hallway outside room 3B Wascom, almost too calm for a morning like this. Emilio Reyes walked with slow and measured, each one resonating faintly on the polished marble floor. His scalp still tingled from the clippers with rough patches that slightly itched, where his locks, black, once curled with pride, now uneven strands, remained an assaillant testimony of what had been taken from him. He did not raise his hand to touch. Eth did not pause to adjust his collar. His expression remained still, calm, eligible, cold, not out of anger but out of absolute clarity. Two secretaries were near the side entrance. One looked up, opened his mouth as if to speak. Button, he thought better of it. The other looked completely the other way. He had seen him before. Drag disrespected, his hair falling in spirals over a tiled floor, and now here he was walking down the same hallway, as if nothing had happened, but everything had changed. Yet the main doors of the courtroom loomed ahead. Inside, a high-profile hearing was about to begin. State of California versus San Diego Police Department. National eyes watching, civil rights groups, press, victims. It was supposed to be a routine preliminary hearing until this morning. Emilio paused just outside the doors, exhaled slowly, and then pushed them open. The conversations died instantly. The pages stopped turning, and heads turned for a moment, breathless. The room forgot how to breathe. The man they had seen escorted down the hallway like a criminal, the one with the exposed scalp, who moved as if they had nothing to lose. Zalossing. He was not a witness, he was not a spectator, he was the judge. He walked down the central aisle, passing rows of plaintiff lawyers, defendants, and journalists. Some looked openly, some blinked in disbelief, and a few shifted uncomfortably in their unsure seats, whether to look or look away. Their shoes struck the floor, whistling. Authority arrived at the podium. Her robe was folded nightly on his chair. He had left it there the night before, as always. Waiting. Emilio did not wait yet. The constable did not signal for help. He took the toga. He unfolded it with both hands and slid it over his shoulders, in a single fluid motion, settling against his back like armor. On the other side of the room, standing rigidly near the side door, was Officer Wilson Morris, his uniform immaculate, his face pale. When their eyes met, found each other, he froze. His mouth opened slightly as if he could say something, but no sound came out. Emilio, he didn't look away. Is the file ready? He asked the court clerk without turning his head. The secretary stammered, "Yes, Your Honor." Emilio nodded once, then sat down slowly to the chair. The podium creaked softly under his weight. He looked ahead with an unreadable expression. We will begin with the preliminary testimony on case number 487. Lay H. Charges of excessive use of force, civil rights violations, and abuse of power are present. All 30 parties followed a round of soft, scattered, and uneven statements. Lawyers moved. Some looked at each other with wide eyes. Others looked at their notes with guilt sliding across their faces, but no one said a word. Emilio's voice remained steady. Proceed. The prosecutor stood up and called the first witness, a retired veteran from the Army named Jose Fuentes, took the stand with a limp and a brace around his wrist. He described what happened the night of the protest, how he had been standing on the sidewalk holding a sign that said "Justice is Patriotism." Described the man who was pushed to the pavement by Officer Daniel Bogenhow. He felt his ribs breaking, how he begged for help, and they told him to stop pretending. Emilio listened, did not interrupt, did not raise his voice, took notes with careful strokes from his pen. Occasionally, his gaze would drift towards the defense table where 30 officers in question sat with stony faces and tense jaws. By out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. Maurice was restless now, one foot hitting his hands, trembling near his belt. The man who had cut his hair was shrinking minute by minute, and yet Emilio said nothing. After this gone witness, a young woman who described how she was pushed face against a patrol car for filming the police. Emilio requested a brief recess, and the courtroom emptied in silent waves. The whispers floated in the air like smoke. Even the lawyers spoke in low voices, as if they feared breaking some. Emilio remained seated when only his secretary, 2 bailiffs, and Officer Morris finally spoke. Officer Morris froze in mid-step. Emilio's voice did not rise but struck like a hammer. Come closer. Morris swallowed hard. Yes, Your Honor. He walked slowly towards the center of the courtroom, each step like a sentence waiting to be pronounced. State your full name for the record. Wilson Morris. How long have you served as a court security officer? Court in this courthouse 18 years, he said with a slightly breaking voice. Lightly, Emilio tapped his pen once, twice, then he put it down. In those 18 years, how many men have you physically handled without cause? Maurice. He blinked. Excuse me, did you hear me? He looked towards the others. Something. No one moved. I don't know. I didn't realize that Emilio interrupted, and if Joe hadn't been a judge, what would have happened? It would have just been another morning when you dragged another Latino man into a side room and shaved him as if he were a threat. Morris opened his mouth, then closed it. Emilio leaned slightly forward. His tone was calm, but each word landed with precision. 12 complaints, 12 official complaints filed against you in this building. All dismissed, all buried because no one had the power or the authority to enforce them until now. Morris didn't speak. His hands trembled. Emilio stood up. Immediate. You are suspended from this court. Formal charges are being filed with the Department of Justice. Will be escorted out of this courtroom in handcuffs. You will not be placed in general population. You will not wear that insignia, and you will fully answer for what you did, not because I am a judge, but because I am a citizen and visits my courtroom too. He also addressed the marshals. Take him out. Morris took a step back. Wait, you can't. But it was already over. Handcuffs closed with a click. He was taken out in the same way he had brought Emilio, without explanation, with dignity, without control. No one applauded, no one cheered. But something had changed. Silent, something definitive. Judge Emilio Reyes remained standing on the stand without blinking, unyielding and fearless, because this was not the end. It was just the beginning. The courtroom had changed. Note in its structure. Its walls remained the same, faded ivory. Its ceiling fan continued to creak slightly every few turns. The tall windows continued to let in cold autumn rays of light that cut through the polished floor. But something else had changed. Something invisible but indefinable was in the air now. A weight, a tension, a reckoning that settled in every seat, every table. Every person who remained at space no longer felt like a courtroom. It felt like a room, holding its breath. Judge Emilio Reyes sat in his silent bench. Shoulders back, firm eyes, but inside the storm had begun to stir. He had not flinched. When Luis Fetha Emilio interrupted, and if Joe hadn't been a judge, what would have happened? It would have just been another morning where you dragged another Latino man into a side room and shaved him as if he were threat. Morris opened his mouth, then closed it. Emilio leaned slightly forward. His tone was calm, but each word landed with precision. 12 complaints, 12 official complaints filed against you in this building. All dismissed, all buried because no one had the power or the authority to enforce them until now. Morris didn't speak. His hands trembled. Emilio stood up immediately. Immediate, you are suspended from this court. Formal charges are being filed with the Department of Justice. Will be escorted out of this courtroom in handcuffs. You will not be placed in the general population. You will not wear that and you will be held fully accountable for what you did, not because I am a judge, but because I am a citizen, and it's my courtroom. Also, he addressed the marshals. Take him out. Morris took a step back. Wait, you can't. But it was already over. The handcuffs closed with a click. He was taken out in the same way he had brought Emilio, without explanation, without dignity, without control. No one applauded, no one cheered, but something had changed. Something silent, something definitive. Judge Emilio Reyes remained standing in the stand without blinking, unyielding and fearless, because this was not the end. It was just the beginning. The courtroom had changed. Note in its structure. Its walls remained the same, faded ivory. Its ceiling fan continued to creak slightly every few turns. The tall windows continued to let in cold autumn rays of light that cut through the polished floor. But something else had changed. Something invisible but indefinable was in the air now. A weight, a tension, a reckoning that settled in every seat, every table. Every person who remained at space no longer felt like a courtroom. It felt like a room, holding its breath. Judge Emilio Reyes sat in his silent bench, shoulders back, steady eyes, but inside, the storm had begun to stir. Hadn't flinched. When Luis Vargas spoke, when he stood at the back with his hat clutched in his hands, trembling when she told the court how Morris had broken his ribs, by raised his voice as the system had told him he had stumbled. He hadn't allowed his face to break, but tooth of it hit him like a slow and relentless tide, swallowing every moment he had ever believed in the silent progress. And when more hands began to rise, hesitantly at first, then firmly, Emilio felt the room changing again. They were standing up not to applaud, not to draw attention, but because the silence had finally collapsed under the weight of its own injustice. Sandra Diaz, still sitting in the chair of the witnesses, she looked around at each face that was now rising with trembling chins and wide-open eyes. Something behind her own expression softened. She was not a woman accustomed to speaking out loud, years in records, always behind a desk, always organizing the chaos that other people created. But at that moment, he realized that his silence had never been harmless, had cost people, had protected the wrong one's. His chest tightened as he looked at Judge Reyes, silently asking for a forgiveness that words could not contain. And when Emilio nodded just once in response, it was not approval, it was mutual understanding, and heavy in the back. Luis Vargas did not sit, kept his place. the column straighter than it had been in years, as if the courtroom would have given back something, a piece of somber dignity, something that had been taken in the flash of a badge and the crunch of bone against a wall. The young deputy near the intransicide, no more than 24 years old, shifted his weight. Uncomfortably, he had remained silent that morning, seeing Maurice drag Judge Reyes to the review room, hadn't said a word, hadn't even looked him in the eyes. Now seeing him sitting there with the authority that he had never raised his voice to claim, I couldn't look away, Gwelt sat in her chest like a stone, not because she had acted but because she hadn't, and deep down she knew that silence was her own kind of violence. Secretary Jasmine was standing at the podium, papers in hand, white knuckles around the folder she held. His pulse quickened. He had grown up admiring Judge Reyes, seeing him as the unbreakable symbol of what justice could look like, seeing justice when a Latino man took the stand. But today, seeing him exposed, stripped, and yet, as he stood up, Jasmine felt her throat tighten with something for which she had no name. Perhaps reverent serage, definitely in pride, fierce and protective. Came the blow. It was sharp, intentional, the kind that doesn't wait to be invited twice. Emilio didn't move at first. He looked at Jasmine, who nodded, and turned to open the side door of the room. The man who entered was wearing a suit, gray federal suit, that still retained the morning's chill in its seams. He was tall, with a neat appearance, a face built forth composure, but even he seemed slightly unsettled as he advanced. Andy stopped before the podium. Judge Reyes, he said in a low voice, urgent. I am with the Civil Rights Office. We have been following the events since this morning. I have Benas instructed me to inform you that as of this hour, the federal court in San Diego is now under federal review. He held a sealed envelope with steady hands, his voice softer than the gravity of his words. Emilio took it without speaking. The weight of the paper felt heavier than it should have, as if it already carried a verdict. Violations of Title 18 continued. We have video recordings. Witness statements. What happened this morning is not being treated as misconduct. It is being classified as a potential violation of rights, federal civil rights. Jasmine inhaled sharply behind him. Sandra Diaz closed her eyes for just a moment. The man shifted his weight slightly. This will move quickly. I advise you to prepare for media political consultations. National media conversations are already happening. I advise you to prepare for media consultations, political ones. There are already conversations with national media. Some names in the Senate are watching. Emilio's fingers tightened the envelope more forcefully. He raised his gaze toward. She had a uniform expression. Start with those who buried the complaints. He said, start with the supervisors who promoted Morris. Start with Judge Barrett, and don't stop there. The man nodded, almost relived, as if he had come, expecting hesitation, and instead found resolution. He added, almost as an afterthought, the recordings from this morning have gone viral. They are everywhere now. CNN, MCNB, Credit, Twitter. It's no longer just a story from San Diego. Emilio didn't blink. I didn't do this for them. The man paused, then blushed. That's why it matters. And, So he turned around and left, the door closing behind him with purpose. Room maintained its stillness once more, but it was not the silence of before. It was different now. It was the stillness of something about to open completely, and for the first time since dawn. Judge Emilio Reyes allowed himself a full breath. Number relief, no triumph, purpose. Pure and annealing. The sky over San Diego turned gray at the beginning of the afternoon, not the soft gray of a lazy day, but the kind that warned of rain, and something heavier behind. Soft of a lazy day, but the kind that warned of rain and something heavier behind. Inside the courthouse, the hall was buzzed with silent urgency. More reporters had arrived, more observers, more silent gazes, but Judge Emilio Reyes did not notice the outside noise. He was not yet seated in his chambers, his robe hanging over the back of his chair. The sealed envelope from the Department of Justice still rested on his desk like a live wire. His scalp still sensitive from it. Morning it itched under the breeze from the ceiling vent, but he didn't move. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened glass of the window, head uncovered, exposed without changes in some aspects but transformed in others. He was thinking not about the morning note about Maurice, but rather about what would come next. There was a knock, to soft knocks. His secretary Jasmine peeked her head in, her eyes still carrying the shock and the weight of everything that had developed. Judge Sue said in a low voice, Father Dominguez is here. He says he won't stay long. Emilio didn't respond immediately. He just gave Asmel a nod. Then he stood up when Father Marco Dominguez and Tiretta's presence filled the room, not because of his height or stature, but because of the stillness. He carried with him a man of 60 years old, gray beard, slightly worn, full suit, eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by something else. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked at Emilio, really looked at him. Are you a chiist, Emilio? Giving a silent and breathless laugh that didn't reach his eyes. To Finewell, the father nodded as if he completely understood why he was doing it. Then he approached and handed over a folded sheet of paper, the edges soft, the ink slightly smudged. These are indeed names, said people who passed by the church after watching the news. Some are victims, some are ready to talk. Some have stories like yours, or worse, he said, if you are ready to listen to them. They are ready to be heard. Emilio took the list, his hand brushing against his father's briefly. The names. There were so many written in different handwriting ages next to them. Contact numbers, some notes in the margin. One said, he made me take off the rosary. I never came back. Another, my son 2009, I still have the medical bill. He swallowed, the pressure behind his eyes increasing, but he held it back. Thank you, Father. The father gave a small nod. We support you no matter what happens next or with you. When the father left, the silence returned, not hollow, this time but sacred. And in that silence, Emilio made a decision. 30 minutes later, the doors of the courtroom opened again, but this time he wasn't wearing his robe. He entered in the courtroom with a simple black shirt, his posture the same, his authority unchanged. But the unmistakable symbolism: what robe, without armor, just himself, scarred. Expositorum stood up when he entered, not because a bailiff told them to, but because they wanted to, because he had endured, and yet he had returned. Jasmine followed closely behind, holding a small folder against her chest, as if it contained more than just paper, as if it carried. Emilio arrived at the stand, stood behind it, and did not sit down yet. He looked through from the courtroom to the plaintiffs, to the defense, to the gallery of ordinary people who had lived under the silence for too long, and then spoke this. Courtroom has suffered a violation, began not only this morning, but for years. Within its walls, in its solence, in the way some people were seen, and others were not. The room was silent, still listening. He lifted a clearly labeled manila folder. Labeled this, he said, is a policy proposal that I am enacting with effect immediate within this court and recommending to the district. He positing them. See, it's called the Reyes reform. Some pen scratched, some heads bowed, but no one moved. Will require bias training for all court staff, court psychological evaluation, anonymous reporting channels, evaluation, public oversight, and a zero tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior by any official employee or designated official under this jurisdiction. The defense attorney, the one who had tried to disqualify him before, shifted in his seat but did not interrupt this time. Emilio continued, I will take this to the district council, the circuit, the Senate, if necessary, because what happened to me should never have happened to anyone else. Necessary because what happened to me should never have happened to anyone, and I will make sure it never happens again. There were no applause, but the atmosphere was charged like the moment before that a lightning bolt falls, when everything holds its breath. And let me be clear, he added, this is it's not about revenge. It's about responsibility to the duty we have to the truth, even when it isn't comfortable, especially then. He looked towards the gallery at Jasmine, at Sandra Diaz, who had remained at the back, now standing with one hand pressed against her heart. The voice of Emilio's voice, lowered not in weakness but in command. This tribunal will no longer be a fortress. It will be a mirror. He stood up. And it begins now. That afternoon, the courtroom slowly emptied, as if people didn't want leave. The conversations continued on the steps, in the parking lots, outside the cafes, and news vans. News on their way out. Emilio walked without his gown again, the coat wrapped tightly against the cold, the bare scalp under the fading sun. A woman in her 70s approached, with slow and cautious steps, wearing thick glasses and a tight church hat in her hands. I never thought I would live to see someone like you do what you just did, said his voice trembling. Emilio took his hand. You lived it. Two only had the microphone. Behind him, a teenager from the courtroom, the same one with the head shaved, approached with the hood down without words, just a look. Then he removed the hood and stood tall. Emilio nodded, and that was off that night. Emilio was standing on his porch, the house silent behind him. His phone buzzed incessantly with headlines, interviews, messages from cities he had never visited, but he let everything wait. The sky was dark now, but he could still feel the light in his chest. Next morning when he entered the courtroom, again things looked the same, but felt different. The eyes met his, now some lowered with guilt, something rose with respect. A concierge gave him a silent fist. To Theachus, a young officer, nodded once and quickly looked away with his cheeks burning. And when he entered the courtroom for a routine custody case, nothing happened that had never happened before. Everyone stood up without instructions and waited. Justice not only had a voice, now it had a face.